Lakshmana Swami enters his college and finds a large crowd gathered outside the main lecture hall. The place was packed, leaving no room for him to enter. He stood on his toes to see what was going on, and noticed a lecture was being given by their English professor G.V. Subbaramaya. He could barely make out what was being said. His eyes followed the professor, pointing to a portrait next to him on the dais and saying, "It is Sri Ramana Maharishi." These words rang in Lakshmana's ears. This was his first introduction to the great sage. It created an instant, irrepressible longing to see him. Unable to navigate through the crowd to meet with the professor, he decides to get the location details of the Maharishi later. Swami eventually makes the much-anticipated trip to Ramana Ashram to see the revered sage, also known as Bhagavan. The ashram is nestled on the sacred slopes of Arunachala. Lakshmana Swami narrates the incident as follows.
In 1948, I arrived at Ramana Ashram. On one of the days of my visit, Bhagavan was sitting nearby on a bench outside the hall, listening to a group of Brahmin boys chant extracts from the Vedas. As I looked, the world completely lost its solid, substantial reality. I became aware that everything I was perceiving in that scene was nothing more than a dreamlike projection. This experience gave me the certainty that everything in the world, including the body of Bhagavan that I was concentrating on, was unreal. As I continued gazing, I had the knowledge and the experience that the real Ramana Maharshi was not the dream body I saw before me. It was the formless, effulgent self that I had experienced on the dried-up lake bed in Gudur. This experience soon passed away, though, leaving me in my former state.
After 3 days, Lakshmana Swami returned to his home state, but, instead of going to his house in Gudur, he relocated to Govindapalli, a tranquil village closer to the coast and about 15 miles from Gudur. He sought solitude for undisturbed meditation and settled into a secluded hut near the ocean. Daily, a villager delivered milk, while Swami cooked the rest of his meals on a makeshift fire beside the hut. Continued a daily routine of waking up at 3 a.m., swimming in a nearby river, meditating and going for walks in the evenings, with the occasional swim in the sea. The local villagers who helped build the hut warned me about an evil spirit haunting the area. Unperturbed by such tales, Lakshmana Swami focused on his spiritual practices.
Shortly after, I encountered a strange phenomenon, a noise resembling a mighty wind knocking down trees. Upon investigation, I observed the tree trunks bending to the ground and then righting themselves. With no rational explanation available, I attributed this to the local spirit attempting to intimidate me. Understanding that these spirits pose no threat unless feared, I dismissed the disturbance and returned to my meditation. My meditation proceeded very well. The constant repetition of my guru's name made my mind very quiet. On a few occasions, it became still. When this happened, the question, "Who am I?" would spontaneously arise inside me. Whenever this happened, as if in answer to the question, my mind would automatically sink into its source, the heart, and experience the bliss of the self.
Swami stayed in Govindapalli for about 5 months. Towards the end of that period, he became a little despondent about the apparent lack of spiritual progress. He decides to visit his guru.
I set off for the ashram immediately and arrived during the Navaratri celebrations. As I sat outside Bhagavan's room, I closed my eyes and began to meditate. Within a few minutes, I found that all thoughts had disappeared except for the primal I thought. The question, "Who am I?" then spontaneously appeared within me. As it did so, the gracious, smiling face of Ramana Maharshi appeared within me on the right side of my chest. There was something like a lightning flash that resulted in a flood of divine light, shining both within and without. Bhagavan's face was still smiling on the right side of my chest. It seemed to be lit up with a radiance that exceeded innumerable lightning flashes rolled into one. The bliss and joy these experiences gave me brought tears to my eyes. A torrential flow welled up within me and rolled down my face. I was unable to control them in any way. Finally, the I thought went back to its source. The internal picture of Ramana Maharshi disappeared, and the self absorbed my whole being. From that moment on, the self shone alone, and the I thought, the individual self, never arose or functioned in me again. It was permanently destroyed through the grace of my Guru in his holy presence. I remained absorbed in the self, without body consciousness, for about 3 hours. The experience was so intense that even when I opened my eyes, I found I was incapable of either speaking or moving. The realization had caused an immense churning within the nervous system, so much so that when body consciousness returned, I felt extremely weak. Once I regained awareness of my surroundings, I observed that everything was as usual. Bhagavan remained seated on his couch, and all the devotees continued with their regular activities, seemingly unaware of my tears and momentary loss of consciousness. Later that afternoon, I went up to Bhagavan in the Darshan hall, prostrated before him, and handed him a note via his attendant Venkataratnam. The note, which I had written in Telugu, said, "Bhagavan, in your presence and by the quest, who am I? I have realized the self." Bhagavan read the note, looked at me for a moment, and then his face lit up in a radiant smile. For some time we just looked at each other. Bhagavan broke the silence by asking me,
"Where did you come from?"
"Gudur."
"That's in Nellore district, isn't it?"
"Yes, Bhagavan." This was the only conversation I ever had with Bhagavan. After giving him these 2 brief replies, I didn't speak again for another 13 years. I moved into a small thatched hut 250 yards from the ashram. One of the first people to visit me in my new house was Venkataratnam, Bhagavan's attendant. On his first visit, he said, "In all the years I have been Bhagavan's attendant, I have never seen anyone present a note like this before. I am experienced enough in the ways of Bhagavan to know that the beaming smile he immediately gave you was proof that the claim was genuine. Bhagavan did not comment to me about your note and the message it contained, but he did ask me to check up on you to make sure that all your needs are being taken care of and that you are properly looked after." From that day on, Venkataratnam became a regular visitor. Bhagavan's health was deteriorating very quickly, and the darshan hours were often drastically curtailed. Though I never sought to attract Bhagavan's attention, he always seemed to know if I was in his vicinity, even if he couldn't see me. On an earlier occasion, when Bhagavan was giving darshan in the new hall, his view of me was completely obscured by a newspaper that one of his attendants was holding. He immediately asked the attendant to remove the newspaper and then beamed his usual smile at me. By April 1950, it was evident to everyone that Bhagavan was nearing the end of his life, severely weakened by cancer and barely able to move. On the evening of April 14th, as I was tidying my room in Palakattu, a picture of Bhagavan, which was on a stool, fell to the ground. I carefully replaced it, ensuring it was stable. However, it fell again minutes later. This recurrence struck me as a sign that Bhagavan was either dead or dying. Compelled to visit the ashram, I was about to leave when I suddenly became deeply immersed in a state of self-awareness, losing all connection with the external world for several hours. I regained my senses around 9 p.m., alerted by a loud commotion emanating from the ashram, which confirmed my intuition of Bhagavan's passing. I hurried to the ashram's back gate, closest to his room, only to discover it had already been locked by the police. I had seen Bhagavan for the last time earlier that day. On that occasion, as we looked into each other's eyes, I experienced such a strong wave of ecstatic bliss, I became completely oblivious of my surroundings. Now, seeing Bhagavan's lifeless body, I experienced very little emotion. People were crying all around me, and my first reaction was that I too should shed a few tears for my guru. But no tears came. I was unhappy that Bhagavan had died, but at the same time, I was unable to cry or participate in the sorrow of the other devotees, because I knew that nothing had really happened. I knew that Bhagavan was the self before he gave up the body, and he was the same self afterwards. Filled with this awareness that nothing had really happened, I left the thousands of grieving devotees and silently returned to my room. Eventually, I moved back to Gadur and built a small house. I stayed immersed in the self, occasionally giving darshans to the visitors.
Discover the profound experiences of Lakshmana Swami at the dried-up lake in Gujarat, including his eerie encounters with spirits during his early morning walks. Dive deep into the transformative events of his life before and after meeting Ramana Maharishi. Uncover the significance behind his 13 years of silence, following a brief, life-altering conversation with his guru. For a detailed exploration of these mystical events and more, consider purchasing the book, No Mind I Am the Self, by David Godman. Thank you so much for watching and supporting this video. Please do not forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel. Stay blessed and Namaste.